The portrait hung in the hallway like a trophy. Creams, tans, pressed smiles. Everyone was in it. Mom, Dad, my brothers, and their picture-perfect families. Everyone. Except me. I remember coming home for the holidays and spotting the oversized frame for the first time. The lighting in the photo was glossy and professional, the kind that smooths out every wrinkle and stray hair. Mom and Dad stood in the center, each son and daughter-in-law flanking them, children grinning in the front. Their eyes were bright and their arms wrapped comfortably around one another. I was struck by how flawless they all looked, how uniform. It was like staring into a shampoo commercial or a travel brochure, except it was my family. And I wasn't there. A strange chill spread in my chest. It wasn't the first time I'd felt invisible among them, but seeing that empty space where I might have stood was a harsh reminder. The decor around it, soft beige walls, an antique table, a vase of fresh flowers, almost felt like props accentuating this prized image. Somehow it sent a clear message that the family had presented itself to the world, and I wasn't part of that world anymore. When I finally summoned the courage to ask my mom why I wasn't invited for the family picture, she just shrugged, saying, "It's just a portrait, honey. You've been distant lately. We figured you wouldn't be comfortable with, the skin stuff." Mom's words sounded so casual, like it was no big deal that my face had been excluded from the biggest family photo they'd ever commissioned. My heart felt like a weight in my chest. For a moment, I found myself searching her eyes for remorse, or at least an explanation that might feel more genuine. But there was nothing else. She just stood there, arms folded, as if it was logical, as if it was purely a matter of practicality. The phrase, "the skin stuff," echoed in my head. I hadn't realized how deep their discomfort ran. We'd only ever spoken about my vitiligo in half sentences and under hushed breath. But this was the loudest statement so far. A portrait that excluded me. It was as if they feared I'd spoil their matching color palette, or maybe they worried someone would ask about my patches. Maybe in their minds, I'd overshadow everyone else's happiness. As I stared at the photo again, the glass reflecting my own stunned expression, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Outright betrayal. My vitiligo started just after I turned 19. At first, it was a tiny patch on my wrist, barely noticeable. A small pale spot against my otherwise deep brown skin. I remember thinking it might be a scar from a burn or a mild allergic reaction. I didn't rush to the doctor or panic. But as weeks passed, the patches started to appear in more visible places, near my elbow, then on my left knee, until eventually I noticed a faint ring around my right eye. That was when I told my parents. They didn't say much, but I recall the way Mom's lips pressed together so tightly, as if she were literally biting her tongue. Dad just nodded and asked if the doctor said it would be permanent. I didn't have an answer. Vitiligo can be unpredictable. At 19, I was young, uncertain, and desperately hoping it was all a temporary phase. But reality sank in one morning when I woke up with a new patch on my neck. My reflection showed me that this wasn't going away quietly, and neither were the hushed looks from my family. The more the patches spread, the quieter everyone seemed to become around me. Though my family never explicitly said they were ashamed, little comments started creeping in. "Maybe try covering it a little more," Mom suggested once, pointing to a sleeveless dress I was about to wear. My dad added, "You were so pretty before it spread," as if that was some sort of comfort, as if it still wasn't me under these changing patterns. Other relatives, mainly aunts and cousins, tried to frame their words as concern. "You don't want to stand out too much in photos." Maybe they were worried that I'd attract stares. Or maybe they were just worried about the family image. At first, these remarks felt like misguided attempts to protect me, to spare me from judgments of the outside world. But as time passed, I realized their cautions stemmed more from their own discomfort. It was as if they thought my skin was a statement I was making. That somehow, my patches were an act of rebellion, rather than a part of my biology. I started to notice the difference between how they treated me and how they treated my brothers. My brothers had normal sibling rivalries with me. Sure, but they weren't the ones making me feel othered. That feeling came from Mom and Dad. At one point, I caved into their suggestions. My aunt took me to a specialty beauty store where we purchased thick concealers designed for covering scars and birthmarks. We bought multiple shades, mixing them to try and match my skin tone. It was such a complex ritual. Color correct the lighter spots, blend, powder, double check under different lighting. Then I'd carefully dress in long-sleeve tops and pants, making sure to leave as little skin exposed as possible. I remember one 4th of July barbecue where I wore a cardigan in 90-degree weather. My mother beamed approval when she saw me because I looked normal. The makeup, though, felt like a suffocating mask. Whenever I accidentally brushed my face against something, like hugging a relative, my heart would race. Worried that the makeup had smudged and revealed my true skin beneath. It was exhausting, and for the few times I passed as just a girl with flawless skin, I felt no relief, only fear of being discovered. I knew it wasn't me. No matter how skillful I became with blending, it didn't change that I was losing parts of my natural pigment. Still, I followed their lead, thinking acceptance might lie somewhere in that path of concealment. Ultimately, I abandoned the makeup and the idea that long sleeves could solve anything. It wasn't a dramatic moment of defiance. It was more like a soft surrender to reality. The patches were part of me, and covering them felt like lying. Around the time I turned 21, I started leaving the house without any concealer at all. The first time I went out with my arms and neck fully visible, my heart pounded the entire drive to the grocery store. I imagined everyone would stare, that I'd hear whispering or snickering. Some people did glance a second longer than normal, but nobody said anything cruel. If anything, I felt a strange liberation in not hiding. I never told my family about that moment, though. I knew they'd worry or scold me, and I wasn't ready to stand up for myself just yet. But that day flipped a switch inside me. I realized that, aside from the occasional curious looks, the world wasn't out to get me. My body was adapting to a new pattern of color, and I could choose how I responded to it. I decided that if I couldn't fully love my skin yet, I could at least let it breathe. Gradually, however, my family's invitations to gatherings became fewer and farther between. At first, I thought it was because I had moved to a different city for college and was busy with my schedule. But even during the holidays or weekends, the calls were scarce. When I did show up, they seemed happy enough to see me, but there was always a mild tension in the air, a sense that they were carefully tiptoeing around me. "Oh, you're here," Dad would say, like he was taken aback I'd bother. Then, when it was time for group photos, I'd hear comments like, "Let's take one real quick before dinner. Oh, can you grab my phone and snap this?" The implication was clear. I was the designated photographer, not a subject. If I hesitated, there was always a polite excuse. "We just don't want you to feel self-conscious." I felt the sting each time, but I swallowed it, thinking maybe I was reading too much into it. Looking back, I see how methodical it was. Each subtle exclusion was like a brick in a wall slowly being built between me and them, and I was unsure how to break it down without causing conflict. One Thanksgiving, I found out they'd taken a family trip to the mountains, without telling me. My brother posted a scenic photo on social media, and that was how I discovered the gathering. When I confronted Mom, she said they assumed I was too busy, or wouldn't like the cold weather. It felt like 1,000 small cuts, each distancing me a little more. Even at my college graduation, their support was half-hearted. They came, clapped politely, but I noticed how quickly they left afterward. In group pictures with my classmates, I smiled my biggest smile, patches visible on my cheeks and hands. But in the official family shots, I was placed to the side, half out of the frame. My mother later asked me for the files so she could crop them. She said she wanted to fit them into a smaller frame at home, but I had a suspicion it was another attempt to minimize my presence. I often asked myself why they were so uncomfortable. Was it fear of what the neighbors or extended relatives would say? Was it genuine concern that I'd be hurt by other people's reactions? Or was it simply that they couldn't handle imperfection in their perfect family narrative? When I started posting on social media, I didn't post photos of myself to prove them wrong. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I just liked how I looked. This epiphany hit me on a random Tuesday as I scrolled through my camera roll. There I was at a local park wearing a floral dress, half laughing at something the photographer, a friend from college, had said. The sun was hitting my skin in a way that made the lighter patches almost glow. I paused on that photo, noticing how content I looked, how free. I realized that I was, in a bizarre way, grateful for the variations in my skin. It felt like my body was painting its own unique design, and for once, I could see the art in it. I wanted to share that, not as a look at me, I'm so empowered type of post, but simply because I found it beautiful. I remember holding my finger over the share button, a little nervous that my family might see. Then I pressed it anyway, telling myself that I had as much right to exist online, visibly, as anyone else. In that moment, I made a quiet promise never again to hide in the shadows. Even when the patches started spreading across my cheeks. Even when people stared. I still liked me. It wasn't a sudden surge of unfailing confidence. There were days I felt insecure, especially when I'd catch a stranger's eyes lingering too long. But there was a new current of acceptance running through me. Each time I posted a photo or glanced at myself in the mirror, I noticed something I'd missed before. The softness in my eyes, the curve of my lips, the distinct patterns that made me different from anyone else. That difference was becoming my identity in a way that felt strangely liberating. I remember the first time a friend told me, "You look stunning," while my arms and face were fully visible. I believed her, not because I needed validation, but because I was finally open to receiving it. It was a shift in perspective. I understood that my worth was not attached to any standard of beauty my family tried to impose. My body had gone off script from the usual definitions of perfection, and I found myself enjoying the improvisation. Even on the tough days, that quiet self-regard anchored me in a sense of wholeness I'd never experienced before. With time, my social media feed became a casual scrapbook of my day-to-day life. I snapped a selfie during a morning coffee run where I clutched my latte and squinted against the sun. I'd share a quick shot of my outfit, often simple jeans and a blouse, before heading to work. Sometimes it was just pictures of pink-streaked sunsets from my apartment balcony or a random snapshot of the city streets at night. Nothing about it screamed inspirational or advocacy. It was simply me, living my life and documenting the everyday moments that brought me small joys. I didn't throw in quotes or talk about overcoming adversity. I was just there, in the frame, visible. And in a sense, that quiet presence said everything that needed to be said. I never approached it with the intent to gather followers or make a statement. But somehow the sincerity of my posts resonated with people. They'd comment on the lighting, the scenery, or yes, sometimes on my skin, telling me they found the contrasts enchanting. It was a soft, steady stream of positivity from strangers. For the first time, I felt like the digital realm offered me a place to simply exist as I was. I started to get DMs from small online boutiques and local photographers asking if I'd be open to a collaboration or a quick photo shoot. At first, I thought it was some sort of spam or scam, who would randomly want to work with me. But a few turned out to be legitimate. One photographer, Jenna, said she'd been searching for fresh faces that broke the mold of conventional beauty. She described my skin as surreal and artistic. I was flattered, but also nervous. The idea of being in front of a professional camera felt foreign, especially since I'd grown up avoiding photos altogether. Yet, curiosity nudged me to try. We met up in a public park, and she took pictures of me laughing, walking, sipping a cold soda, just being me. She later sent me the final edits. Actually, there were barely any edits, aside from adjusting color tones. Seeing myself in high resolution with my patches proudly on display was simultaneously shocking and exhilarating. I posted a few of them online, again with no deep captions, just a note about a fun day with Jenna. My messages lit up. The encouragement from strangers felt genuine, not forced. It was a new kind of acceptance, something my own family had never given me. Over time, those small collaborations led to slightly bigger opportunities. An indie clothing brand asked if they could feature me in their lookbook. A creative director at a local marketing agency reached out for a seasonal campaign. Each time, I hesitated. I worried about stepping too far outside my comfort zone, about somehow betraying my family's desire for me to stay low-key, hidden. But I kept reminding myself that I wasn't doing this to antagonize anyone. I was simply following an open door. And each shoot was so refreshingly normal. People joked around, asked me about my background, never once implying I should hide my patches. That alone felt groundbreaking, to be seen without disclaimers or apologies. While I was never aiming to become a model, I couldn't deny the thrill of being part of creative projects that valued authenticity. My online audience grew, but it never felt like I was building a fan base. It was more like a community of people who genuinely appreciated diversity. Some days I'd log on and find an encouraging message from a photographer in Brazil or a boutique owner in Italy. It was as if my small corner of the internet had opened a world of possibilities. Then one morning, I got a life-changing email. Subject: Fenty Beauty Campaign and Opportunity. We came across your photos online, your presence, your confidence, your beauty. We think you're stunning and would love to collaborate for an upcoming campaign. I nearly dropped my phone when I read the email. For a second, I thought it was one of those phishing scams. I mean, who gets an email from Fenty out of the blue? But the email address looked official, and the tone felt genuine. My mind raced through all the ways this could go wrong. What if they made a mistake? What if they wanted me to cover up my vitiligo, ironically, in a campaign? But something about that short message, its directness and warmth, told me this was real. My heart pounded so hard I could practically feel it in my ears. I sat at my kitchen table for a long moment, just staring at my screen, rereading those lines. Then a slow smile spread across my face. Fenty was known for championing inclusivity. I remembered their foundation line that celebrated every skin tone. Now they wanted me, a woman with vitiligo, to be part of that narrative. It felt surreal, like stepping into a dream I didn't even know I had. My fingers trembled as I typed back a thank you and tried not to let my excitement spill out too wildly. I showed it to Maya. She screamed so loud the barista dropped a spoon. I thought it was fake, but it wasn't. Maya was my best friend since high school, the one person who never looked at my patches like they were a burden. She jumped up and down in the middle of the cafe, nearly knocking her iced latte off the table. We caused quite a scene, but I couldn't stop laughing. Part of me was still in disbelief. Maya grabbed my shoulders and shook me playfully. "Girl, do you realize what this means?" she exclaimed, eyes shining. I was too overwhelmed to answer. We ordered celebratory pastries, each bite tasting like a small victory. When we calmed down, we reread the email together, analyzing every word, imagining the possibilities. Could this be a life-changing opportunity? Maybe, or maybe just a memorable gig. Either way, I knew I couldn't pass it up. The next day, I responded with a definitive yes, my heart thrumming the entire time. It felt like a doorway had opened to a bigger world, one where my vitiligo wasn't a flaw, but a feature, an aspect of my beauty that deserved a platform. And I was finally ready to step through. The Fenty shoot was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I flew out to Los Angeles, escorted to a vibrant studio space filled with towering lights, racks of clothes, and a buzz of energy that felt electric. They asked me to sit in the makeup chair. But it wasn't for camouflage. Instead, the makeup artist enhanced my natural skin tone, letting my patches remain front and center. When I looked in the mirror, I saw the same me, just with a bit of shimmer around my eyes, a subtle gloss on my lips. I'll never forget the moment the creative director said, "Embrace your look. It's exactly why you're here." Every time the camera clicked, I felt more alive, more seen. There was no fear or worry about how to hide my patches. Instead, they were photographing me precisely because of them. The entire team treated me as if my vitiligo was a canvas of art they wanted to celebrate. When I finished the day's shoot, I stepped outside the studio into the warm LA air, feeling a sense of completeness I'd never known before. In that space, I was fully visible, recognized not in spite of my skin, but because of it. Once the campaign launched, everything happened in a whirlwind. The photos, they didn't alter a thing. My face with its varying shades appeared exactly as is, displayed across Fenty's social media and website. The reaction was instantaneous. People across the globe left comments praising the brand for championing real diversity. And in the midst of that tidal wave of attention, I found myself booking more shoots, interviews, and even short magazine features. Journalists asked me about my journey, my skin, my perspective on beauty. It was surreal. I'd gone from sidestepping family photos to being at the center of a conversation about representation. What struck me most was how many people, especially young girls with vitiligo, slid into my inbox with emotional messages, telling me they'd never seen someone who looked like them in mainstream beauty campaigns. They wanted tips on confidence, on how to handle stares, on navigating family acceptance. While it was humbling, it was also a lot to take in. I tried my best to reply to everyone. Seeing the wave of encouragement and the outpouring of stories reminded me that this was bigger than me. I had somehow become a beacon for others who felt unseen. Runway offers followed, and I found myself in New York, Milan, and even a small show in Tokyo. Each time I stepped onto a catwalk, I tried to bring that same sense of ease I'd felt on the Fenty set. No heavy makeup, no apologies. It was exhilarating to walk with my head high, hearing the soft hum of the crowd appreciating what I brought to the stage. Photographers captured my stride, and magazines wrote blurbs about the model with patches. For a while, that phrase bothered me. Why couldn't they just call me a model? Full stop. But I realized the world was still learning to see beauty in forms that had traditionally been sidelined. If being labeled the model with patches helped open people's minds, I could live with it. Every interview I did, I spoke honestly about my experience, never turning it into a shallow tagline or a sob story. My vitiligo was part of who I was, not a gimmick. And each interview, each photo shoot, each runway strengthened my conviction that I was finally stepping into a life I could be proud of. A life where I wasn't just existing in the background, but shining in the spotlight. Times Square. Me. Bare skin. Full face. Unapologetic. No lighting tricks. No Photoshop. Just me, blazing across one of the busiest places in the world. I found out about the billboard 3 days before it went up. One of the brand managers from my recent shoot with Fenty Beauty texted me a preview, and I swear my soul left my body for a moment. Seeing my image, larger than life, displayed in the heart of New York City, was an honor I couldn't have dreamed up even in my wildest fantasies. Standing there on the actual day, with people bustling around, cars honking, screens flashing countless advertisements, I looked up and saw my face. And it wasn't the old me who used to shrink away from photos or wear sleeves to hide. It was the me who had come full circle. Vitiligo patches front and center. Tears welled in my eyes. Not sadness, but sheer awe at how life had taken such a sharp turn. The crowd around me had no idea that the billboard model they were looking at stood right among them, quietly absorbing the magnitude of this moment. It was freedom. The kind of freedom I had once thought was impossible to achieve. Not long after, my phone exploded. "Is that you? Why didn't you say anything? We're so proud. We always knew you were beautiful." Texts, DMs, missed calls, from relatives, old classmates, neighbors, even family friends I barely remembered. And of course, from my own family. Suddenly, all that distance they'd placed between us evaporated. They wanted details, updates, behind-the-scenes stories. My brothers were tagging me on social media, exclaiming how amazing it was to see their sister on a giant screen in New York. Mom and Dad left multiple voicemails, speaking in excited tones I hadn't heard since childhood. Part of me felt an odd dissonance. Only a few months ago, they'd posed without me in their precious family portrait. They'd made me feel unwelcome at gatherings, hidden me behind cameras, and now they acted as if they'd been cheering me on the whole time. I wasn't sure how to respond. My heart was still raw from the years of quiet hurt and the final blow of that portrait. Yet, in their messages, they sounded genuinely happy for me. Maybe it was the shock of seeing me in such a public triumph, or maybe they truly realized how wrong they'd been. Either way, it felt like a sudden pivot, one I hadn't prepared for emotionally. The same people who couldn't bear to include me in a photo 6 months ago were now trying to tag me in it. I found myself staring at my phone, scrolling through notifications where family members had posted pictures of my billboard, calling me an inspiration, telling their friends that I was their amazing daughter, their beautiful sister. A swirl of emotions gripped me. Confusion, sadness, a tinge of anger. I remembered how they'd tiptoed around my vitiligo for years. How they'd made me the photographer rather than a subject. How they'd quietly locked me out of that mountain vacation. And yet now, they wanted to show me off to the world. I tried not to let bitterness consume me, but it stung nonetheless. I thought about how, at 19, I'd have given anything for them to accept me wholeheartedly. But acceptance gained only after I'd become publicly celebrated felt empty. I wasn't sure if it was genuine acceptance or just excitement over my success. In the rush of everything, calls from agencies, new photo shoot offers, and this unexpected avalanche of attention, I had to pause and breathe. What did I truly need from them now that I'd learned to stand on my own? I didn't answer. Not out of bitterness, but because I'd already let go. When I held my phone, I felt this strange sense of relief wash over me. I wasn't obligated to explain how much they'd hurt me or to demand an apology. I wasn't waiting on their approval or yearning for them to finally say I was beautiful. I had discovered my own beauty long before they realized it was something to celebrate. So I let the calls ring, let the messages stack up. Maybe one day I'd meet them face to face and have a real conversation about everything that happened. But for now, I didn't need that closure or validation. My life had outgrown those days of wondering if they saw me as worthy. Maybe they were proud now. Maybe they wanted to rewrite the past. That was on them. My choice was simply to move forward without resentment. As I put my phone down and looked at my reflection in the small mirror by my desk, I saw only calm acceptance. The bitterness I'd harbored for so long felt distant. In its place was a sense of peace that, for the first time, was genuinely mine. Shortly after, I began receiving messages not just from fans of my modeling, but from people who shared their own journeys with vitiligo. Some were younger women, just discovering their first patches and feeling terrified about the future. Others were mothers of teenagers who'd locked themselves away in their rooms, afraid of being teased at school. Their words were raw, filled with the same confusion and loneliness I'd once felt. Reading them brought back memories of covering up in long sleeves and thick makeup, trying to shrink myself to fit a standard I could never truly match. I realized I was in a position to offer more than a quick reply. These individuals needed community, a place where they could find practical advice, emotional support, and a sense of belonging. So I began brainstorming with Maya, who was always brimming with enthusiasm. We started outlining ideas for a digital community. Online workshops where dermatologists could speak, panels where people with visible differences could share experiences, and even organized photo shoots where everyone could celebrate their unique skin. It started as a modest plan, just a few Zoom sessions, but we felt a groundswell of interest, people hungry for connection and representation. Within months, that digital community took shape. We named it Unfiltered Souls, a nod to the idea that real beauty doesn't need masking. From small virtual meetups, it blossomed into a full-fledged movement. We hosted monthly video panels featuring models, artists, and mental health professionals. People swapped tips on skincare routines and stylish clothing that highlighted their patches rather than hiding them. We organized photo projects where participants could stand in front of a camera, free of filters or editing, celebrating every mark that made them different. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from around the world, from people with vitiligo, birthmarks, scars, and other visible differences. Some were men, some were non-binary, some were older adults. All of them carried stories of feeling overlooked or minimized. Now they felt seen and heard. And I realized something profound. This entire journey, every tear, every moment of isolation led me here, to a place where I could lift others up. Leading Unfiltered Souls gave me a sense of purpose that even the biggest billboard could never match. I saw hope in the eyes of every new member, and it reminded me that real success is measured in the lives we touch, not the accolades we gather. Funny how the girl once excluded from a family portrait ended up changing the whole picture. You don't have to prove your worth to people who only see beauty through filters. Be seen, on your own terms, then help others do the same.